Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona with the February 7th, 2024 edition of Horses to Watch, where we look back at trips from the last week, trying to find horses that were prevented from achieving their optimal result through circumstances, whether it be traffic trouble, track bias, poor starts. This week, the theme is going to be track bias. There were a couple of venues last weekend on the dirt where it seemed like you really wanted to be on the rail to have your best chance at success. Those two tracks were Oaklawn Park on Saturday and Aqueduct this past weekend, both Saturday and Sunday. I'm going to talk about one race each from each of those venues and days. Let's begin with the race from Oaklawn, and it was the feature race on that Oaklawn Saturday card, February 3rd. The 11th race was the Grade 3 Southwest for the 3-year-olds, a Kentucky Derby prep. Let's break these runners from the gate, and I'm going to focus on the two horses breaking from the far outside post positions, the number 11, Just Steel, and the number 12, Awesome Road. And with those disadvantageous draws, it's no surprise that they got wide trips in this race. But the thing I want you to pay attention to watching this Southwest is how much horses that rode the rail were benefited and how much those that were outside were disadvantaged. The horse that rode the rail to victory is the number 10, Mystic Dan, and you'll note that his rider, Brian Hernandez, just hugs the inside every step of the way. Not the case for the number 11, Just Steel. You can see is in fourth right now. He was about 3 wide around that clubhouse turn. And the number 12, Awesome Road, you might have noticed in the run around that clubhouse turn, he got hung out in the 5th or 6th path, really where you didn't want to be. Even on a fair racetrack, you don't want to go that wide. Not a biased surface that can really be the kiss of death for your chances. And indeed, he loses by a large margin, but we'll talk about some of the reasons for that. As for the top two finishers in this race, you can see they're moving at about the same rate down the backstretch. Just Steel traveling in the bridle, moving well in the 3 path, but down, moving even better down towards the inside is that number 10, Mystic Dan, who wins the race. And you can just see how he is going forward, staying in that rail path. It looks like the number 4, who's on the lead, is also on the rail, but you'll see as they turn into the stretch, he's actually in more the 2 path, and Mystic Dan is able to sneak through right inside of him, hugging that inside path under Brian Hernandez Jr. You'll see Just Steel takes the lead right here, but he doesn't have that same momentum as that horse who cuts the corner to his inside. Meanwhile, Awesome Road, there he is, still extremely wide off the far turn. He's in the 5 path into the stretch, could not be successful with that kind of trip. Just Steel, all things considered, actually stays on pretty well to finish second in this race, despite the fact that he was never in that inside path. He'll almost get nailed on the wire by Liberal Arts, who closed for third. That was a horse who was closing outside of him across the finish line, but Liberal Arts is another horse who rode the rail for the majority of his trip, staying towards the inside around the clubhouse turn and the far turn. So that horse was also with the bias. Not so for Just Steel, who ran very well to be second, but also not the case for Awesome Road, who really had no chance to be effective at any point in this race. Now, these horses potentially could move ahead on the Kentucky Derby trail. I think given the fact that Just Steel is trained by Dwayne Lucas, who likes to participate in every Derby prep available to him, we'll likely see him next time in the Rebel Stakes. And he's a horse that could fly under the radar in that race. I think some people are underrating his performance from last weekend. And as for Awesome Road, we'll see if his connections press on with the Kentucky Derby trail. But this is a horse who has been up against it in some races before, making those wide moves and flattening out. So I think this was a step in the right direction for this horse, but you do want to see him finish off his races a little bit better, even on a fair racetrack, because he's gotten similar trips on fair racetracks 2 and 3 back and still wasn't able to finish off those races. So he's one that I would be able to give a look to if he's a fair price next time, but I think he is a horse that you do want to get a price on if he shows up in another Kentucky Derby prep race. Well, let's move on to Aqueduct. And like I said, also a bias in place at Aqueduct on both Saturday and Sunday's card of last week. I think it was a little bit stronger on Saturday, the day that they ran the Withers over a wet racetrack. And we'll take a look at one race from that day, February 3rd. It was the 6th race on the card, maiden special weight event. Check out the number 7 and number 8 as they break from the starting gate. Now, the number 8, Elfgar, is the horse towards the back of the pack. These two actually bumped together coming out of the starting gate, and Elfgar was green after that, and that's why he finds himself so far back in the early stages here. He's going to fade off the screen and really be off the screen for the majority of this race. The number 7, he has it all, who's in the middle of the pack. He was just highlighted. He did bump with Elfgar at the start, but gets himself into better position. Now, the bias situation I want to discuss is, once again, the rail was the place to be. And it seemed like some riders were not fully aware of how strong the rail was on this day. And one jockey who really was taking advantage of it, especially on the Saturday card, was Jose Gomez, who rides the eventual winner, the number 2 Liberty Central. And you're going to see that horse just be glued to the rail every step of the way and find some extra energy through the stretch through riding that advantageous path. Not the case for the number 7. He has it all. Who you can see is trying to chase wide. He's about 2 to 3 wide coming around the far turn. He's going to angle out at the top of the stretch, and just difficult to produce a kick and run through the stretch while never on the inside path. Meanwhile, the number 8 Elfgar, he's towards the back of the pack. You're seeing him turning into the stretch in second to last position. He makes a mild run to pass some tired rivals through the stretch. Note that he was never on the inside through the early stages of this race. Even when you watch the head on, he was always in the 3 to 4 path, and he's just under very light handling through the lane by jockey Lane Luzzy, not really asking him for his best after that disastrous start. Meanwhile, he has it all, maintains steady strides through the wire to get up for second. A good effort by him. If you do roll it through the gallop out of this race and watch that on your own, you'll notice that the number 8 Elfgar actually gallops out very well all the way up to the winner of this race, just about a furlong past the wire. So I think that's a horse that could really do better with added ground in his next start. Elfgar is certainly bred to get added ground. He is a half-brother to a horse named No Hain, No Gain, who was a confirmed dirt route or allowance low-level stakes kind of horse who could go a mile and farther on the dirt. So he's one that I would definitely look forward to going a mile or longer for his low-profile connections. Next turn out should be a decent price. As for He Has It All, this was a good debut for this horse. He had worked well coming into this race, ran a nice race considering he was against the bias for trainer Ray Handel. Given the way that he moves and his pedigree, he is a horse that I wonder if he may ultimately be best on turf. His dam was more of a turf horse, and I think there is turf influences on the bottom side of his pedigree, but obviously no chance to run on the turf right now, it being the middle of winter. So if he runs back on the dirt next time, I think he's a horse that could take a step forward given how well he ran against the bias in this spot. Let's take a look at one more race from Aqueduct last weekend. This was the Sunday card, February 4th. Again, the track was drying out, but I think the bias was still there on Sunday. And we're going to take a look at the 7th race. This was a starter allowance, 50,000, going 6 furlongs. The number 8, Uncle George, you might have noticed as they broke the gate, this horse actually stuck his head right through the starting gate a second before the starter pressed the button. So he broke out of the gate just a fraction of a second early, but it didn't really help him at all because he took a stutter step after that, was actually held a little bit in the gate, and he broke last in the field due to that. So he actually had something to overcome, even though he might have broken that stall open a little bit early, and he rushes up on the backstretch into position at this point, but he had to work to get there. And furthermore, you really wanted to be saving ground once again this day. You're going to notice the 2 horses who finished first and second in this race both spent a significant amount of time on the rail. The number 4, Vodka Mardini, who's leading now, spends most of his trip on the inside. He leads for almost the entire race before getting nailed at the end. The number 6, who eventually wins this race, Kentucky Joker, Dylan Davis, giving this horse a perfect ride. You could see him saving ground at the back of the pack, still staying on the rails. They come into the stretch before angling out. Not the case for the number 8, Uncle George, you saw highlighted there. He was legitimately 3 to 4 wide all the way around the track. Really hard to be successful with that kind of trip on Saturday and Sunday at Aqueduct this past week. And Uncle George actually stays on pretty well to finish 4th in this race, not beaten that far at the end. And it might look, looking at his past performances, like he regressed from performance and speed figure standpoint. But given the fact that he had that tough start, was against the bias, I actually think he ran one of his better races here. And he's a horse who is 1 for 17 lifetime. He's not the most appealing wagerings prospect when he shows back up in the entries because he does have that proven history of not quite getting the job done. But I really think he put forth one of the better efforts that we've seen from him recently in this effort last Sunday. So he is a horse that I think you could give a look to if he's the right price when he shows up in a similar spot next time out. So those are all the races to take a look at this week. If you want to follow these horses or take a look at some other horses that ran on these bias days at both Oaklawn and Aqueduct from this past week and follow them moving forward, you can add them to your horse watch on DRF.com. You'll get email notifications for your account when these horses run back in the future, or you can go into your DRF formulator or Timeform US and make trip notes in the charts, and those trip notes will show up when these horses run back in the future. So that's all for horses to watch this week. I'll be back next week with another batch of replays to analyze.